Hello everyone, today we're going to talk about German sixths, Italian sixths, French sixths, Neapolitan sixths, everything you ever wanted to know. I'm here with Loki. He's got his blue coat on because it's a pretty cold day here in the UK. And I met a friend of mine in the shop the other day, and she said that she'd been watching one of the videos, but she wanted to know what on earth I was going on about with all these foreign named chords. And I suddenly realized, yes, I'm inclined to use all sorts of standard harmonic terms as if, you know, these are things that everyone knows, but actually, why would people know what an Italian sixth is, or a French sixth, or a Neapolitan sixth? So let's talk about it.
I'm not a musician, but here I was in this world, which is a fantastic world.
Now, I realise there's lots and lots of stuff out there on the internet about these chords, much of it excellent, but I think maybe my approach today is going to be, well, not quite so detailed in the sense of looking at lots of examples from repertoire, and not so detailed about the actual theoretical element, and maybe slightly more practical and a wee bit speculative or improvisational in terms of how we can imagine these chords came into being, and try to contextualize them a bit. And I'm also going to be talking about the first theoretical treatise that discusses the chords. So here is that treatise. I'm looking at a PDF of it. It's a book about musical composition, written in 1812 by the slightly unfortunate named William Crotch, famous, well, he's not that famous now, but at the time he was considered, you know, the most famous, prestigious musician in the UK. Rather like Mozart, he was a child prodigy. I mean, he was playing the organ at the age of 3. So he was this kind of wunderkind of the late 18th century, who then, and this is very kind of British, he grew up to be really an academic, an Oxford Don. And he wrote this treatise in 1812, or it was published in 1812 in Oxford. 1812, the year of Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, the year that Dickens was born, and the year that Beethoven wrote his 8th Symphony. So a key year for lots of reasons, but not least because of this fascinating treatise. So this is the first theoretical mention of any of these chords in a published document. So the interesting thing is that it's in a chapter called Chromatic Discords. So he introduces the idea of all these chords as examples of chromatic discords. In other words, chords that lie outside the sort of standard harmonic vocabulary. And he's calling them all dissonances of various sorts. It says, the Italian, German, and French sixths are extreme sharp, both in the major and minor key, and are inversions of the triad of fa. And there's an asterisk just to clarify that point, where he says these and the Neapolitan sixths are denominated after the nations which invented them. He says that categorically. I mean, I've no idea what that means, either in terms of the nations or their invention. I mean, did the Germans invent the German sixth? I don't know. I think we'll get onto this national characteristic thing. I mean, it's actually quite useful as a way of remembering the chord, but I'll talk more about that at the end. But I've no idea about the origins of the chords in terms of countries like that. Anyway, that's what he says. But also the description is slightly weird. Let's put this in C major and see if we can work it out. So he says the Italian, German, and French sixths are extreme sharp. Okay, they're sharp, both in the major and minor key. So they function in major keys and minor keys. And he says, and they're inversions of the triad of fa. The triad of fa, okay, so if we're in C major, we got do, re, mi, fa. So fa is the subdominant. In C it would be F. It's a fourth above the tonic, and so the triad of fa would be that, and the inversion would be first inversion would be that. Now, already there's a little bit of an issue here. Let's put it in, and I'll explain why in a moment. Let's put this in C minor. So we'll make fa F minor. If we invert it and put A flat at the bottom, and then if we apply what he calls an extreme sharp, we get an F sharp on the top of that chord, Now, do you see how Crotch is seeing this? He's seeing it as a version of the subdominant. This isn't how it's normally taught, but it's really interesting. First inversion of subdominant, and then the root of that chord, which is at the top of the chord, is then sharpened, and then you get, in that instance, you get an Italian 6th. Right, let me try and explain that in a simpler way as I can. So there's fa, there's the subdominant, there's the first inversion. We sharpen the 6th, because you're going from the A flat at the bottom of the chord, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we sharpen that 6th, and we get an augmented 6th, and then that will precede the dominant, and then we can cadence. Now, let's explain all this in a bit more detail in terms of the context. So the context of all this stuff is cadences. So you're approaching a cadence, and very often as you approach a perfect cadence, the standard cadence of the classical era, 5-1, you therefore have to approach it. So you have to have what's often known as a predominant chord, a chord that will take you to 5 and then 1. So this would often be the subdominant, as Crotch has pointed out. There it is, subdominant, dominant tonic. I suppose I ought to go back even further and explain something about tonic and dominant.
Let's start at the very beginning.
For those of you who may not be entirely sure. So the tonic is the central pitch of any key. It's note 1 in any scale. So note 1 is the tonic, supertonic is the note above it, mediant is the 3rd note, subdominant is the 4th note, dominant is the 5th note. So acoustically, the 5th note of the scale is the strongest note in the scale, apart from the tonic. There's also another interesting thing, which is that if you go down a 5th from C, you come to the subdominant, that's F, because that's a 5th below the tonic. So in classical harmony, you tend to have these 2 pivots. One is the 5th above, one is the 5th below. And between the tonic and the dominant, you have the mediant because it's midway between the tonic and the dominant, and between the tonic and the subdominant, you have the submediant. Okay, so you've got these 3 very important chords: tonic, subdominant, dominant. These 3 chords, if you put them next to each other, there's the subdominant. You get all 7 notes of the scale are contained within those 3 chords. And also there are 3 major chords in a major key. The root, the tonic chord is major, the dominant chord is major, and the subdominant is major. And then you also have 3 minor chords. The supertonic is minor, the submediant is minor, and the mediant is minor. So you have 3 minor chords. Isn't it fascinating? And then you also have the 7th note of the scale, which gives you this strange diminished chord. Okay, right, now let's go back to how this applies to the augmented 6th chords. And I was talking about how you approach a cadence. So if you're approaching a cadence and you're improvising in the 18th century, you might go to the subdominant and then to the tonic. So the subdominant is a useful way of approaching the dominant, although it's, as I've just demonstrated there, there's a real problem because you get parallel 5ths. If you literally go from a root position of the subdominant to the dominant, you get parallel 5ths. It's common enough in pop music to hear that progression, but certainly in the 18th century that would have been considered a horrific thing. Parallel 5ths are a big no-no, so we can't have that. So better to use the first inversion of the subdominant, going to the dominant, and then to the tonic. Do you see? So that creates a better counterpoint. Okay, if you're in a minor key, that would be, subdominant would be minor, with an A flat at the bottom, then the dominant, and then the tonic. And this is where Crotch's thing comes in. If you're on that subdominant first inversion and you sharpen the F, sharpen the sixth of the chord, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then you've got your Italian sixth. Italian because there are actually just 3 notes in it, A flat, C, and F sharp. And it gives you this lovely approach to the cadence, makes it more expressive. Now, I think what happened originally was, as all of these theoretical things, it grew out of improvisation, quite likely vocal improvisation. Imagine you're in the opera house and you're approaching a cadence and you're singing about something sad. Let's say you are singing, I am sad. If you sing, I am sad, well, that's okay. What we call a Phrygian cadence. But what if you wanted to make it sadder or more poignant by making it chromatic? I am very sad. Now, I realise I'm being ridiculous, but do you see how the vocalist, la da da da, it becomes just more expressive because it's more chromatic. So I think that's how the chord might have emerged originally, as a sort of expressive inflection. And like all these wonderful chords, it's about a kind of ambiguity, because of course it also sounds like a dominant seventh, weirdly. It could be A flat 7 resolving on D flat, but it isn't. It's actually a chord that's positioned on the subdominant, then sharpens the sixth, and then we come to the cadence. But you can see that ambiguity about the direction that it's travelling in harmonically is what makes it such a rich and interesting chord through the 18th and 19th centuries and beyond. Okay, so that's the Italian sixth. 3 notes traditionally resolving towards a dominant chord. Right, let's talk about the German sixth. It's very similar, except that it also has the 5th. So it's got 1, 3, 5 and the sharpened 6th in it. And it's just a fuller version of the same chord. There is a little bit of a problem, which is that if it goes directly to the dominant, you get consecutive fifths. So you either avoid that by just omitting the 5th in the next chord, or, and this became standard practice, you actually go to the second inversion of the tonic and then the dominant. So it becomes a chord. The German sixth tends to be a chord that doesn't go directly to the dominant so much as it goes to a second inversion of the tonic. And this becomes enormously useful in the late 18th century, early 19th century. A composer like Schubert uses this chord so often. Let's look at one of the greatest pieces of music ever written. We're looking at Schubert's C major quintet from the end of his life. And this is the second movement, the wonderful, this thing, oh, so amazing. Right, the astonishing Adagio with its pizzicato cello and its beautiful first violin thing. Right, I'm not going to play that, but that's what it's from. In the middle of that movement, it steps up a tone into F minor for this amazing, turbulent, terrifying middle section. And then it returns, after the terrifying middle, it returns to the beatific and wonderful E major music. So, and that's how it finishes. At the end of the movement, we get this amazing thing happen, which is this. So, okay, that's so that it ends in E. Look at this. C major, F minor, you're immediately plunged back into the world of the middle section, then the German sixth, and then that comes back to the second inversion of E, and then the cadence. So wonderful his early romanticism in the freshest possible way, doing incredibly experimental things around this cadential convention. Because here we are in E major, we for one chord go to F minor, then step back to what feels like a dominant seventh in F minor, but actually that what was a B flat is really A sharp, and that turns as a German sixth towards E major. Here's another example from late Schubert, equally famous. It's from the great G flat major impromptu, this one. With this amazing song-like melody, astonishing and unique somehow. And the tonality is so rich and warm, isn't it? The G flat major. And then at the end, he has this. So final page, it's not dissimilar to what we saw in the quintet actually. So there we go, we're cadencing. Bass now drops to C flat minor. Very ominous trill. Right, C flat minor or B minor, but it's spelled as C flat minor. Suddenly, oh, that thing happens. It's a German sixth that then takes us back home. And he does it again in an even richer way, takes the modulation again, this time goes further with it. B minor, the ominous trill takes us to G minor, D7, but actually it's a German sixth, back to G flat. So you can see how at the beginning of the Romantic era, composers are doing these wonderfully experimental things with the augmented sixth chord, particularly in Schubert's case, the German sixth, because as you can see in this case, he can modulate. There's the seventh, B minor, which then turns into D7, going to G minor, just a semitone above, very similar to what we saw in the C major quintet. The dominant of G minor, which then functions as a German sixth, and then magically, you can open a window, and this is the thing, you see, it's not just about some dry, boring, theoretical thing. It's actually about, and this is what music is really, it's not a boring theoretical thing. It's about these windows that open onto something that's almost mystical, a window opening onto a magical realm.
But here I was in this world, which is a fantastic world.
That's what music is, and that's how these chords function. They're like windows. I don't know how many of you had advent calendars when you were children, the thrill of those calendars, those windows that you open. And nowadays there are sweets. I think when I was growing up, there were just pictures inside, but whatever it is, there's a kind of magic about simply opening the window. Or has anyone seen that wonderful film Enchanted April from the 1980s? And there's this amazing scene, they've just been in a storm and they've gone to bed and it's dark and they're in this house that seems a bit scary, and then in the morning they open this window and it opens out onto this fabulous view overlooking a bay in Italy. It's just one of those magical moments. But I think music's full of this kind of thing, these revelatory harmonic progressions. So the German sixth, but originally, coming back to the theory, it's a chord that's positioned, well, like Crotch said, subdominant. If you're in C major, subdominant is F. First inversion of the subdominant has an A flat at the bottom. And then if we put C, E flat, F sharp, then it becomes this rather beautiful, expressive way of approaching the cadence. And then later on, it becomes a kind of window into a modulatory window into new harmonic regions. Right, let's talk about the French sixth. So we've done, the Italian sixth basically has 3 notes. The German has 4. And a good way of remembering this is to associate it with the cooking of the country which it's denominated by. So if it's the Italian sixth, just the 3 notes. Think of Italian cuisine, which is often simple but wonderful. So it's a certain simplicity, clarity about it, typical of Italian cooking, but also of Italian music. There's something simple and clear. And I don't mean that in any way, in a derogatory way. The Italian musical tradition is as rich as the German one. It's amazing. But the Italian sixth has 3 notes. A flat, if we're in C major, A flat, C and F sharp, and then that simply goes to the dominant. The German sixth, bit like German cooking, I realise these are ridiculous generalities, is a bit stodgier. There are 4 notes in it, thicker because of the 5th being there. Normally goes to the 2nd inversion. Doesn't go to the dominant because of the consecutive 5th normally. It normally goes, as we've just been discussing, it normally goes to the 2nd inversion of the tonic, and then you get the cadence. 2nd inversions, by the way, it isn't really a proper chord. It's a chord that is like a double appoggiatura to the dominant. That's really how it always functions. It's too unstable in classical harmony you can't stop a piece like that. It's floating in the air. It's got a double appoggiatura which is taking to the dominant, and then you can resolve. So that it has a magic of its own. We've talked about this quite a lot in videos about how you often get the climax point on that chord, because you can, like in Mozart, you can this isn't Mozart, this is me, but you can just improvise around that point of tension and then resolve it. Do you see what I mean? So that's where you traditionally get the cadenza from, the 2nd inversion. And here, extra tension around this point, the German 6th, and there it is. And very often that is the sort of progression you get at the climax of the movement. German 6th to the 2nd inversion, which requires that resolution. On the subject of resolutions, by the way, you know that Mozart's dad used to get the little Mozart, when he was sort of 5, out of bed by simply playing a C major scale, leaving an unresolved dominant 7th. And the story goes, and I can believe it, that made Mozart, compelled him to run out of bed, come downstairs and resolve the cadence. So, these things have immense meaning. They require resolution. Music requires resolution. Drama requires resolution, by the way. Theatre, books require resolution. This is an essential human thing. That's why music is an art form. It does all the same things as other art forms, perhaps in a more mysterious way, because it's not necessarily verbal, is it? But you've still got a tension that needs, well, look at this tension, the German 6th, that needs resolution. Well, that is a kind of resolution, but it isn't fully resolved. It needs to land on the tonic. So that's the German 6th, and then one last international chord to look at, and this is the French 6th. So we just had the German 6th. If instead of the 5th of that chord we have an augmented 4th, A flat to D, that's your French 6th. It means that in terms of the dominant chord where we're going, the 5th note of the dominant, if we're in C minor, the 5th note of the dominant is D, and that's already there in the French 6th. So we get that kind of spicy approach to the cadence, just a bit more spicy. Again, like French food, a bit spicy. It's got a taste, it's got a kind of lovely flavour, a slightly colour, it's got its own colour. Do you remember in my video about Wagner's Tristan and Isolde, I ended up basically saying that the great Tristan chord, the most famous chord in the world, someone then pointed out that isn't that from Hard Day's Night by the Beatles? Yes, perhaps it is now. But the Tristan chord is enormously famous. Now there it is, and no one has been able to work out what it is. Well, perhaps the best way of describing it is it's really like a French sixth. It's a French sixth with an appoggiatura. So there's the appoggiatura, there's the French sixth. So look, if we were in A minor, there's the French sixth, there's the dominant, there's A minor. Wagner does that, then the French sixth, and then he goes to dominant seventh, but with another appoggiatura. And then he doesn't resolve it. He doesn't go there. He just leaves it hanging in the air. But it is essentially a French sixth that isn't resolved. And this is how the history of harmony works. We have these conventions, and then composers of genius turn up and they subtly subvert those conventions or they pull the rug away, and you're just left with the illusion. It is a sort of illusion. It is a sort of illusion, that harmony. Right, so let's just recap. Why don't we do it in A minor, since Wagner's taken us to A minor. Here's A minor. Let's have an Italian sixth. There's an Italian sixth in A minor. Here's a German sixth with the C in it. And then the second inversion, and then the cadence. Here's a French sixth. That has the augmented fourth in it, but it means you don't have to worry about consecutive fifths. You're ready to go to the dominant because you've already got the B there. And it also gives you that lovely, spicy quality. So those are those three. So here in Crotch, he's done the French sixth, and he goes on to say the Neapolitan sixth is a minor third and a minor sixth to Fa, and is never inverted. So all the augmented sixths that we've just looked at, I mean, if you want to know where to find an augmented sixth normally, let's do it in A. There's the fifth in A. You want to go to the minor sixth, and you build up your augmented sixth over the top of that. F, A, D sharp, and then you can cadence to A minor. Okay, so it's a sixth. It's a minor sixth above the tonic. But as Croft has already pointed out, its origins are really in the subdominant, first inversion of the subdominant, and then sharpen the sixth. Okay, now, here we're talking about the Neapolitan sixth. So the Neapolitan sixth is a minor third and a minor sixth to Fa, and is never inverted. It is resolved into the triad of Sol. Okay, I mean, this is 1812 after all, so it's a little bit complicated. So we're looking at, it's a minor third and a minor sixth to Fa. Right, let's stick with C major, Do, Re, Mi, Fa. So Fa is F, and he's saying, if you're in C major, you go to the subdominant, and he says the Neapolitan sixth is a minor third, so we'll put a minor third on top of that F, and a minor sixth, and we don't invert it. So the Neapolitan sixth, if you're in C major, would be F, A flat, D, and that too precedes a cadence. So it's like again, it's a sort of embellishment of the subdominant by pushing the top note to D flat. In Italian opera, in Naples, I could imagine that people might have sung, again, if it's a melancholy song, I feel so melancholy. If you want that to sound even sadder, woe is me, you simply move chromatically around that. You get these gorgeous sort of diminished, there's a diminished third there, isn't there? D flat to B to C. Wonderful. Now, this is often discussed in terms of being the flattened supertonic. Well, the reason for that is the chord that we just looked at is D flat, isn't it? You could see that as D flat major, preceding the perfect cadence. But I think Crotch is right in the original text to say it grows out of the practice of preceding the cadence from the subdominant, embellishing that, and doing that. In the 19th century, I think it became standard to think of it as the flattened supertonic. And in fact, if you look at Chopin in his great wonderful C minor prelude, look at this. This D flat chord is used, D flat major, going to A flat major, and then at the end he does a wonderful thing where he descends to C minor, and the same chord becomes the Neapolitan D flat, root position D flat, and then cadence to C minor. So you can see how the theory of the supertonic, flattened supertonic, D flat major, becomes the way people view this chord. And the thing is, supertonic, the chord of the supertonic, let's stay in C, D minor, if you add a seventh to that, you get a C, and that is a way of approaching the cadence. And you also see that that chord contains the subdominant. So the subdominant and the supertonic seventh are very closely related because they have almost the same notes in them. It's just a stack of thirds. And that's why these two regions, the supertonic and the subdominant, are often indistinguishable. The supertonic, particularly when it's functioning as what we call a secondary dominant, let's say we're in C major and we've got D, D7 going to G7 to C. So we've got a dominant of a dominant to there. We're going around the circle of fifths. You can see how the supertonic, however it's written, whether it's written as a seventh or a half diminished, it becomes another of these predominant chords that come in front of a cadence. And therefore, often when we're talking about these chords, as we are with the Neapolitan, whether we see it as a sort of embellishment of the supertonic, in other words, that would be D diminished in a minor key, but if we flatten that top note, we get the D flat. Do you see that we can view it as a flattened supertonic, or we can view it as the subdominant with a sort of added sixth. Anyway, it doesn't really matter, but the chord has immense power, because if you move away from these theoretical discussions, let's take the famous case in the Moonlight Sonata, where in the introductory opening, we have this wonderful thing. There it is, there's the Neapolitan. The F sharp in the bass, that's the Neapolitan, and it's about to cadence. And if Beethoven had been less amazing, he could have, let's apply Crotch's principle and simply call it a subdominant. Do you see how that works perfectly well? Just isn't as nice. So the Neapolitan always adds that lovely colour because it has that D and it has that chromatic inner voice thing. All these things grow out of, we think of these things as vertical chords, stacks of notes, but really it always flows out of the horizontal thing, the line that produces that all-important melancholic chromaticism. So Beethoven, it's that D, it's the D natural that gives it that wonderful colour. Imagine if the other possibility, if we view it as a supertonic, that would be a normal supertonic. Perfectly sound chord to use, just isn't as exciting, is it, to go, that's more exciting. So these things grow out of colour and then kind of expressive, pulls on the heartstrings. As soon as that chromatic element is there, it pulls on your heartstrings. So it's functional harmonically, but it's also expressive, and that's why all these chords are so important. And they, throughout the 19th century and on into the 20th century, these chords enrich the harmonic vocabulary of music so that composers can, and improvisers for that matter, can start to use these gorgeous alternative chords that give rise to more and more exciting harmonic regions. And that is a very, very quick survey of the entire family of geographical chords. So we've done Italian sixths, German sixth, French sixth, and then in its own little category slightly, the Neapolitan sixth, because it's not an augmented sixth. It's just that the first inversion is very colourful, placed, if you like, for simplicity's sake, we'll say on the supertonic, the flattened supertonic, and it gives you this gorgeous mystery, a semitone above the tonic that needs to be resolved. Gorgeous. So they're all gorgeous, all these chords. Just think of them in those terms. All of them are gorgeous. Okay, well, thanks for watching, and I hope that's helpful. And if it isn't, let me know. I mean, I realise that for some viewers, this is a yakety yak channel. And even, you know, I don't often do theory because theory feels very dry, and you have to be careful that it doesn't become dry, because it isn't. It's what we're dealing with here is the fabric of music, and it's really exciting. But let me know if you want more of this kind of thing. I'm happy to talk again about any of these chords in more detail, or sort of the magic of harmony. It's all very exciting. Thank you for watching.